They said she was nothing. Not broken. Not damaged. Not even worth the pity it takes to call something damaged. Nothing. In a world where your worth was measured by the power of your howl, she had no howl at all. In a world where dominance was announced with sound, she moved through every room in total silence. The pack called her Omega. But even that was generous. Omegas had a place in the hierarchy. They had a function. She didn't even have that. She had a broom. A corner to sleep in. And a name no one used. They called her the Mute Girl. And the Alpha, the man whose entire existence was built around protecting every member of his pack, down to the weakest, the smallest, the most forgotten, looked at her one morning in front of every wolf who served him and said 7 words that were meant to mean nothing because she was nothing. If she doesn't come back, we lose nothing. The pack laughed. Not cruelly. That would have at least required them to see her. They laughed the way people laugh at an irrelevant observation. The way you laugh at weather. She picked up her pack. She walked into the frozen wilderness alone. She walked for 4 hours into a cold so deep it had its own kind of silence. And then she found the cave. And in the cave, she found the egg. And everything, every single thing, that had ever been decided about who she was and what she was worth was about to be unmade. Because 3,000 years ago, the most powerful creature that ever lived chose the person she would trust with her return. She didn't choose a warrior. She didn't choose an alpha. She didn't choose someone powerful. She chose someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be imprisoned by the people who were supposed to protect you. She chose the Mute Girl. And the ancient king sleeping inside that egg? He had been waiting for her too. Stay with me. Because what happens over the next 3 hours will remind you of something the world has been trying to make you forget. Being told you are nothing has never once made it true. The pack hall of Ashenvale smelled like pine resin and dominance. It was a scent Lyra had learned to move through carefully, the way you move through smoke, head low, breathing shallow, disturbing as little of it as possible. Every wolf in the hall radiated it, that easy, unself-conscious power that comes from never having questioned your right to take up space. Lyra took up as little space as possible. She stood near the eastern door, her arms full of ceremonial firewood, each log almost as long as she was tall. Her boots were cracked at the toe. Her coat was a hand-me-down from someone larger. She kept her eyes at floor level, cataloging the boots of everyone she passed the way a person catalogs exits in a burning building. Survival is a system. She had built hers out of invisibility. She had not always been mute. She had memories, distant and salt-worn at the edges like old paper, of a voice. A child's voice, high and unguarded, asking questions about everything. What made the northern lights move? Why wolves howled at the moon but the moon never answered? Whether dragons had been real or only a story the old packs told to make themselves feel small and lucky simultaneously. She could not remember the exact moment the voice stopped. Only that one day it was there, and then it was not, and then the world reorganized itself around her silence as if it had always been this way. The pack had reorganized fastest of all. She stacked the last log in the ceremonial rack beside the great hearth and turned to go. She was good at this, arriving, completing, vanishing. 3 steps, and she would be back in the corridor. 5 steps, and she would be invisible again. The Mute Girl. She stopped. Not because the voice surprised her. She had heard it every day for 3 years, low and carrying, the kind of voice that didn't raise itself because it had never needed to. Alpha Kale stood at the head of the long council table, a map of the Eastern Territories spread before him, surrounded by his senior wolves. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the map. He spoke to the room, not to her. That was important. That was the whole architecture of it. We need someone to carry the supply cache to the Eastern Ridge outpost. The trail through the Black Frost is unstable after last week's icefall. It needs to be someone expendable. One of the senior wolves, Davin, second of the pack, wide-shouldered and perpetually bored, glanced toward the door where Lyra stood. The Mute Girl, he said. Same words Kale had used. An echo. A confirmation. Kale looked up from the map and for one terrible second, his eyes crossed hers. Gray eyes, pale as winter water. They registered her the way they registered the firewood rack, as furniture that had been placed correctly. If she doesn't come back, Kale said, returning to the map, the pack loses nothing. The senior wolves nodded. Someone made a note on a ledger. Someone else poured more coffee. The moment passed without ceremony because it had not been a moment at all. It had been an accounting decision. Lyra walked out the eastern door. She did not allow herself to feel it until she was in the corridor with the heavy oak door closed behind her. Then she stood very still against the cold stone wall and breathed through her nose, for counts in, for counts out, until the burning behind her eyes retreated. She had been carrying the pack's firewood for 3 years. She knew every corridor of this compound, every cold room and warm one, every face and its rank. She had memorized all of it the way a prisoner memorizes a cell, not because she planned to stay, but because knowledge was the only kind of power no one thought to take from an Omega. She went to the supply room. She packed the cash without being told twice. She had learned long ago that needing to be told twice attracted attention, and attention was dangerous. She swung the pack onto her back and walked out the front gate into the black frost. The cold took her immediately, arms around her shoulders like something that had been waiting. She walked. The trail narrowed after the first mile, dropping into a gully of blue-black ice and back up the other side. The wind came sideways across the ridge, pushing her toward the edge with patient, impersonal force. She leaned into it and kept moving. She thought about nothing. Or rather, she thought about the particular nothing that had become her internal weather, a gray, undramatic absence. Not despair. Despair required the belief that something better existed to be despaired about. She had stopped believing that somewhere around year 2. The eastern outpost was abandoned when she arrived. That was wrong. There should have been 2 wolves on rotation. She set the cache inside the door of the stone shelter and turned to start the walk back. That was when she felt it. Warmth. Coming from the ground. Not the ambient warmth of shelter or fire, but something directional, warmth with intent, warmth that had a source. She looked down. Through the packed snow and ice beneath her boots, the faintest thread of amber light pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and went still. She should have started walking. Instead, she followed it. The cave mouth opened in the face of the ridge wall 50 meters north of the outpost, half hidden behind a curtain of frozen vines. It breathed warm air into the cold like something alive. Every pack instinct she had, which were not many, because Omegas were not trained in instinct, only obedience, told her to go no further. Something older than instinct said otherwise. Lyra pushed the frozen vines aside and stepped into the dark. Before we go any further, I need to stop here and be honest with you for just a moment. I know you found this video because something in you recognized Lyra's story. Maybe it wasn't a dragon egg or a frozen mountain. Maybe it was an office, or a classroom, or a kitchen table where someone looked through you like you weren't there. Maybe someone used the exact words, not useful, not worth it, costs too much, takes too much, gives too little. Maybe it was someone who was supposed to protect you. This story exists because those of you who have ever been the mute girl, the invisible one, the one the room doesn't adjust for, deserve to watch someone like you be chosen by something ancient and undeniable and powerful. Not rescued. Chosen. And I need your help to keep making stories like this one. If this is already reaching something in you, if Lyra already feels like someone you need to see walk out the other side, please hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing and it tells the algorithm that this story matters. It is the single most powerful thing you can do to make sure the next person who needs this finds it. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We release new stories every week and every single one of them is built for the people the world forgot to count. And leave a comment. Tell me who you came here for. Tell me if you've ever been the person the room loses nothing over. Because I read every single one. And you deserve to be heard. Now. Let's go back to Lyra. She just walked into the cave. And what she finds in there is going to change everything. The cave was wrong in the best possible way. It should have been dark. It should have been cold, silent, and smelling of old stone and the bones of whatever creature last used it for a den. Those were the rules of caves in the Black Frost. Those were the rules of everything in the Black Frost, cold, dark, indifferent. This cave was warm. Not the sharp, artificial warmth of a fire. Something older than fire. A heat that pressed against Lyra's skin from all directions at once, like being held, like being surrounded by something that knew her body temperature and was quietly matching it degree by degree. And it was glowing. The walls pulsed with a deep amber light that came from nowhere she could identify, not bioluminescent moss, not mineral deposits catching reflected light, not any natural phenomenon she had words for. The light moved in long, slow waves from the back of the cave toward the entrance, rhythmic and even, like breathing. Like a heartbeat. Lyra stood very still just inside the entrance and let her eyes adjust and her instincts reorganize themselves around what she was seeing. The cave was not large. 20 feet deep, perhaps, narrowing at the back to a chamber barely wide enough for two people to stand in side by side. Every surface was dry. The floor was smooth stone, as if water had run here for a very long time and then stopped, leaving behind something polished and deliberate. In the center of the back chamber, on a natural shelf of raised stone, was the egg. She had expected, if she had expected anything, something beautiful. That was what the old pack stories said about dragon eggs, on the rare occasions anyone spoke of them at all. They said the eggs glowed like trapped sunlight. They said they were warm to look at, warming to be near, that the sight of one was like remembering something good from your childhood that you had almost entirely forgotten. The stories were wrong. The egg was terrifying. It was large, as long as her forearm, as wide as both her hands placed side by side, and it sat on the stone shelf with the quiet authority of something that had never once questioned its right to exist exactly where it was. Its surface was black, so deeply black it seemed to pull the amber light in rather than reflect it. Black veins ran across it in branching patterns like frozen lightning, or like something cracked on the inside, trying to find a seam. And from those cracks, the faintest thread of gold leaked into the air and joined the ambient glow of the cave walls. The pack's warnings came back to her all at once, crowding into the space behind her eyes, every lesson she had absorbed through proximity rather than teaching, every overheard conversation in corridors she wasn't meant to be in. Dragon eggs were cursed. The last dragon had died in fury and grief 3,000 years ago and cursed the egg to destroy any creature that touched it. The old texts called it the Desolation Lock, a trap set by a dying creature against a world that had betrayed her. She should go. She had delivered the cash. She had completed the task. If she started back now, she would reach the compound before full dark. She would have done exactly what was asked of her, no more and no less, which was the safest amount of a thing to do. She thought about Kale's voice. She thought about the senior wolves nodding without looking up. She thought about the ledger where someone had written her assignment in ink, neat and administrative, the same way you might note a weather change or a change in supply rotation. If she doesn't come back, the pack loses nothing. She crossed the cave in 12 steps and stood before the egg. It was warm from 3 feet away. Warm from 2. At arm's length, the heat of it pressed against her palm like a question being asked very clearly in a language she didn't know she spoke. She thought, if I go back empty-handed and silent, those 7 words remain the truest thing anyone has said about me. She thought, I would rather die proving I was something than live confirming I was nothing. She touched the egg. The world stopped. Not dramatically, no explosion of light, no sound, no physical force that knocked her backward. Just a cessation. As if time had been moving at a certain speed and then someone laid a hand on it very gently and said, wait. Under her palm, the egg pulsed once. She felt it in her hand, in her wrist, in the hollow of her chest where her voice used to live. The black veins on its surface began to move. Slowly, the way ice cracks in spring, deliberate, inevitable, one fracture connecting to the next in a pattern that had always been there, waiting for the temperature to be right. The black retreated. Gold replaced it, running into the channels the black had carved, filling them with light. The cracks along the side of the egg sealed. The amber glow of the cave walls deepened, steadied, changed in quality from ambient to intentional, from background light to focused attention. And somewhere inside the stone, in a consciousness so large and so old that it made the cave seem small and the mountain above seem temporary, something that had been sleeping for 3,000 years opened one eye. It did not speak. It did not move. It simply noticed her. The warmth moved from her palm, up through her wrist, along her arm, into her shoulder and down into her chest, settling in the hollow place like something that had always been meant to be there, finally arriving after a long and difficult journey. In the silence, which had always been her only country, Lyra heard something she had no framework for. Not words. Not a howl. Something older than both. A heartbeat, vast and steady and impossibly warm, that found her own heartbeat and matched it, beat for beat, like a question that already knew its answer. She stood in the cave for a long time. Outside, the wind moved across the ridge. The cold continued, indifferent as ever, as cold has always been. But here in the warmth, in the amber light, with her hand on an egg that should have destroyed her, Lyra felt something she did not have a word for. She had never been given the word for it. No one had thought she would need it. It was the sensation of being seen. Not catalogued. Not assessed. Not found useful or useless or expendable or worth the pack losing nothing over. Seen. Completely. Without condition. Without an accounting decision attached. She did not know what was waking up inside the stone. She did not know what it wanted from her or what came next or whether the stories about the desolation lock were true and she had just sentenced herself to something terrible. She knew only that she was still standing. That she was warm. That something ancient and enormous and utterly without contempt had just turned its full attention to her for the first time in her life. And whatever came next, she was not walking back into that compound as the girl who touched nothing and turned around. She straightened her spine, which she had been keeping curved for 3 years like a question mark, like an apology for existing, and she stood upright in the amber light. She was still mute. She still had no pack status, no rank, no name anyone used. She still had cracked boots and a borrowed coat. But something ancient had just decided she mattered. And she was going to walk back into Ashenvale carrying that knowledge in the hollow of her chest like the first ember of a fire the world didn't know was coming. The walk back was different. Lyra could not have said exactly how. The trail was the same blue-black ice in the gully, the same sideways wind on the upper ridge, the same cracked toe boot on the right foot that had been rubbing her heel raw for 2 months. Everything was identical. But something had changed in the quality of the world's attention. Or perhaps in the quality of her movement through it. She passed the first border marker of Ashenvale territory, a carved stone post, pack sigil deep chiseled into its face, and a wolf she didn't recognize stiffened as she went by, nostrils flaring, head turning to follow her. Not with contempt. With something more wary than contempt. She kept her eyes forward. At the second marker, 2 pack wolves on boundary patrol stopped talking mid-sentence when she passed. She felt their gaze on her back for a full 30 seconds after she had walked on. She counted. She had learned to measure safety in seconds. At the compound gate, the young wolf on door watch, a boy barely into his adult rank, who had never looked at her directly in the 4 months he'd been posted there, looked at her directly. He took 1 step back. His hand moved toward the handle of the short blade at his hip, not drawing it, just touching it, the unconscious self-reassurance of something that has just been reminded the world contains threats it doesn't fully understand. Lyra stopped. She looked at him. He looked at her. She raised her eyebrow, a question, "Are you going to open the gate?" He opened the gate. She walked into the compound courtyard and crossed to the great hall, because she still had to report the cash delivered, because tasks had completion requirements regardless of what happened in caves on the way, because the world continued demanding its accounting even when the accountant had just been fundamentally restructured. She pushed open the heavy hall door. The room changed. Not loudly. Not with drama. It was a cascade of small adjustments, conversations pausing, cups halted mid-lift, heads turning in that particular involuntary way that animal instinct produces when something has walked into a space that the instinct has tagged as requiring attention. Davin, the second, who was standing near the fire, turned and put his hand flat on the mantelpiece and stared. An elder wolf named Senna, who Lyra knew only by sight, white-haired, unhurried, the pack's oldest living member, was sitting in the corner nearest the door. As Lyra passed her, Senna's nostrils moved once. The old woman's eyes went very still. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone who had just heard a word they last heard in their childhood and thought they had misremembered. Lyra walked to the head of the room. Cale was there. Of course he was. He was always there in the early evening, reviewing the day's reports, his senior wolves orbiting him in loose and comfortable order. He had his back to her. He heard her come in, she knew he heard her, because he heard everything in this room, every footstep and breath and subtle change in air current, but he did not turn. He was demonstrating, as he often did through small and entirely deliberate actions, that she did not require his immediate attention. She set her pack on the floor and crouched beside it and took out the one thing she had brought back from the cave. A scale. It had detached from the egg when she lifted her hand away, a single black and gold scale the size of her palm, thin as a leaf, dense as something far heavier than it had any right to be. It was warm in her pack. It had stayed warm for the entire 4-hour walk back. She placed it on the stone floor in front of her, stood up, and waited. Cale turned. He was about to say something. She could see the words forming in the set of his shoulders before they reached his face, the particular arrangement of absolute unsurprise that he put on like armor every time she appeared in his peripheral vision. He stopped. His gray eyes moved from her face to the scale on the floor. The scale pulsed once with a slow gold light, the same rhythm as the cave walls. Warmth spread outward from it in a soft ring across the cold stone. The room went very quiet. Not the quiet of boredom or inattention. The thick, careful quiet of a room full of predators who have just collectively identified something that does not match their understanding of the world and are waiting for more information before they decide what to do about it. Davin crossed the room and crouched over the scale. He held his hand above it, not touching, and pulled it back. His expression was profoundly uncomfortable. The elder Senna rose from her corner chair and moved with the unhurried efficiency of extreme age and extreme knowledge, and crouched where Davin had crouched. She did not hover her hand above it. She looked at it with the eyes of someone recognizing a word they had been told was extinct. Then she looked at Lyra. Then she looked at Cale. Cale was still looking at the scale. He picked it up. It sat in his hand, large, scarred, the hand of someone who had spent his entire adult life translating his body into force, and it did nothing. No pulse. No warmth. No response. It was a rock. An unusual rock, but a rock. He passed it to Davin. Same. Davin passed it back to Cale. Cale walked to Lyra. He held the scale out to her, extending his arm, placing it back in the space between them. His face was neutral in the way that, after 3 years of reading the room from its edges, she had learned to recognize as the controlled surface over something that was not neutral at all. She took the scale. It pulsed immediately, warm and rhythmic, gold running through the black in slow waves. Cale looked at her. Really looked at her. Not through her, not past her, not the glancing acknowledgement of furniture correctly placed. He looked at her face with the full weight of those pale winter water eyes, and what she saw in them was not contempt. It was not warm either. She would not have known what to do with warmth from him. What it was recognition. The expression of a man seeing something he was certain didn't exist, in a place he was certain it wouldn't be, held by someone he was certain held nothing of consequence. Recalculating. It was the most she had ever received from him. The elder Senna's voice came from behind him, low and even, the voice of someone choosing words with the precision of someone who knows how much precision costs. Cale. We need to speak. Now. Privately. Cale did not look away from Lyra. Tomorrow. No, Senna said. Now. Something moved across Cale's face that Lyra could not name. He looked at the scale in her hand one more time. Then he turned and walked toward the back corridor with Senna following. The room exhaled. Slowly, conversation resumed. Cups were lifted. Davin went back to his post by the fire, though he kept glancing toward the door where Cale and Senna had gone with the expression of a man running threat calculations he didn't have enough information to complete. Lyra closed her hand around the scale. It was warm. She was still Omega. She still had no rank, no voice, no name anyone used. The room had not rearranged itself around her the way it rearranged itself around strength and dominance. But it had paused. It had reconsidered. It had felt the need to be careful in a way it never had before. That night, lying in her corner of the servants' quarters with the scale pressed against her sternum, she felt it again, that pulse, that matching heartbeat, that presence vast and old and entirely without contempt. Under her hand, against her chest, something enormous and ancient pressed back. It was waiting. Whatever it was, whatever she had started in that cave, it was patient. It had been patient for 3,000 years. It could wait one more night. Lyra was carrying water across the east courtyard when the 3 wolves came through the main gate. She noticed them the way she noticed most things, through peripheral attention, the low-level surveillance system she had built over years of needing to know what was in a room before a room knew she was in it. She didn't stop walking. She didn't look directly. She filed them away in the part of her mind that catalogued threats and kept moving. But something about the three made the filing feel insufficient. They were not an Ashenvale pack. Their coats were wrong, heavier, formal, cut in the style of the territorial capital rather than a border compound. They moved with the specific confidence of people who were used to arriving somewhere and having the somewhere immediately reorganize itself around them. Silver authority chains hung at their belts, the kind that caught the gray winter light and threw it back sharp as a warning. High Council. Lyra adjusted her route. Not obviously. Not in the way that would suggest she was avoiding them, because avoiding High Council wolves attracted their attention and their attention was the last thing an Omega without documentation wanted. She moved parallel to their path, same direction, different trajectory, invisible as furniture. She heard them ask the gate guard for the Alpha. She kept walking. She was rounding the corner to the water room when she heard the gate guard's voice shift, that particular pitch change of someone being more helpful than they wanted to be because they were afraid to be less helpful than required. She filed that away too. The water room was small, cold, and empty. She filled the 2 carrying jugs she had, working methodically, listening to the sounds of the compound reorganize themselves through the walls. The speed and pattern of footsteps changed when the High Council arrived, more deliberate, more self-conscious. Even confident wolves became aware of how they walked when scrutiny was in the building. She was lifting the first jug when the water room door opened. Davin. He looked like a man who was carrying news he hadn't decided how to deliver yet. He looked at Lyra. He seemed to consider saying something and then change his mind and then change his mind back. The Alpha wants you in the hall, Davin said. Now. She followed him. The hall was full of the particular tension that filled rooms when power came to assert itself and the room's occupants had not yet calculated whether to submit to or resist the assertion. The 3 council wolves stood at the head of the long table. The one in the center was speaking, a man with a composed, clipped delivery of someone whose job was to represent decisions already made, not to make them in the room. His name, she would learn later, was Aldrich. He was a council arbiter. The silver chains at his belt were not decorative. Cale stood opposite him. His arms were at his sides. His face was doing the neutral over not neutral thing. Lyra positioned herself near the back wall. She was good at back walls. Aldrich was saying something about the territorial stability obligations of border pacts, about the Council's mandate to assess and neutralize destabilizing elements, about the obligation of all pacts to cooperate with Council authority during periods of elevated threat assessment. She caught the phrase elevated threat assessment and felt the scale, warm against her sternum through 2 layers of fabric, pulse once in response. We are not here to cause disruption, Aldrich said. His voice was smooth and entirely without warmth, the voice of someone who had long ago decided that warmth was inefficient. We are here to evaluate. A dragon-adjacent artifact event was registered by 3 separate border monitors last night. The readings originated from this compound's territory. We have the authority and the mandate to assess the source and determine whether it poses a pack stability risk. He looked around the room. His gaze passed over Lyra the way everyone's gaze passed over Lyra. Not seeing, just covering the space. We will need full access to the compound and full cooperation from all pack members during the assessment period. This is not a request. Cale said, what are you actually looking for? Evidence, Aldrich said. Of contact. Contact with what? With whatever sent those readings. Silence in the room. The senior wolves were very still. Lyra breathed carefully. For counts in, for counts out. The scale was warm. Her heartbeat was steady. The heartbeat beneath her heartbeat, the vast, slow, 3,000-year pulse of something that did not concern itself with arbiters or authority chains, was steady too. Cale turned his head. He was looking directly at her. His pale eyes moved from her face to her chest, not intrusively, precisely. She knew what he was doing. He was locating the scale. He had seen it pulse in her hand the night before. He knew where it was. He looked back at Aldrich. She belongs to this pack, Cale said. His voice was flat and certain and entirely without qualifier. Council authority ends at my border. You know the law. Aldrich looked toward the back wall. Toward Lyra. And this time he actually saw her, and she watched the calculation happen behind his eyes as he took in what he was looking at, an Omega, small, underfed, dressed in other people's hand-me-downs, with no apparent ranking or function. A flicker of something crossed his face. Recalibration. Her? Aldrich said. Not cruelly. With something that was almost worse, genuine surprise that this was what the readings had pointed to. Her, Cale confirmed. Aldrich looked at her for another moment. Then he looked back at Cale with the expression of a man adjusting a calculation he had thought was already complete. Will require observation access, Aldrich said. Ongoing. You'll require it from the other side of my border, Cale replied. I know the law as well as you do. Aldrich was quiet for 3 seconds. He was the kind of man who counted before he responded, not from uncertainty, from precision. This isn't finished, Aldrich said. It is for today, Cale said. The 3 council wolves left. The hall exhaled. Lyra stood at the back wall. No one was looking at her. Then Senna, from her corner chair, was looking at her. The old woman's eyes were very calm. She gave Lyra a single slow nod, the kind that means, I see you. I know what this is. Stay steady. Lyra gave nothing back. She was not sure she had anything to give yet. But that night, when the elder Senna found her in the corridor after dark and pressed a very old, very thin book into her hands, skin pages, not paper, the writing so old it was in symbols rather than letters, and whispered, I'll teach you to read it. Tomorrow. Come to me after the morning meal. Lyra understood that the recalibration was not only happening in the council arbiter's mind. It was happening in the compound. One person at a time. She was still mute. Still Omega. Still cracked boot, borrowed coat, back wall invisible. But the world was starting to update its records. And somewhere in the frozen cave on the ridge, the gold veins in the black egg burned a little brighter, and the heartbeat matched hers without being asked. He assigned himself as her guard on a Tuesday. He announced it to his senior wolves the way he announced everything, with a sentence that was entirely about strategy and entirely without personal content. Border patrols needed consolidating. The council's observation request, while denied at the perimeter, required an internal response. The asset needed monitoring. The asset. Lyra heard this from the corridor, as she heard most things, through walls and closed doors. She was not surprised by the language. She filed it in the same category as the ledger entry from the supply cache warning. Administrative. An accounting decision. She was mildly surprised that he was doing it himself. He explained that too, in the same flat strategic voice. He had the most complete intelligence on the situation. He was best positioned to assess any changes in status. It was the efficient choice. Davin, from his place by the fire, gave no visible reaction. Which was itself a reaction. Cale found her an hour later in the lower corridor, carrying a stack of folded linens to the storeroom. He fell into step beside her without preamble or greeting, his hands clasped behind his back, his pace adjusted to hers in a way that she suspected he hadn't noticed he'd done. I'm going to show you the compound's emergency architecture, he said. Safe rooms, vault access, secondary exits. You need to know them. She glanced up at him. Then I continued walking. Safe rooms first, he said. He showed her. He was thorough and entirely impersonal about it, conducting the tour with the efficient forward momentum of someone briefing a tactically relevant party. She followed. She had her slate and chalk on its cord around her neck, as always. She had carried a slate since she was 12 years old, when she had understood that the world would not slow down for her silence and she would need to find a way to enter it. He was showing her the pressure mechanism on the vault door when she held up the slate. She had written, "Why are you doing this yourself?" He looked at the words. He looked at the mechanism. He finished demonstrating the pressure lock before he answered. Because I have the most complete picture of the situation, he said. She wrote, "That's the explanation you gave Davin." A pause. Fractional. It's also true one. She wrote, "People usually have more than one true reason." He looked at the words for slightly longer than the previous ones. Then he turned and continued down the corridor. She followed. The south corridor was older than the rest of the compound, the stone was different, darker, fitted without mortar in the ancient style. She noticed as they moved through it that the walls were carved. She had been in this corridor dozens of times, carrying things and keeping her head down, and she had never noticed the carvings because she had never allowed herself to look at walls. Walls were for people who had leisure. She looked now. Dragons. Not decorative. Not stylized. Carved with the precise urgency of someone recording something real, something that had happened and needed to be remembered accurately. The images ran in sequence along the left wall, a narrative in stone. A wolf and a dragon, side by side, the space between them rendered not as distance but as connection, as current. Below them, the pack, vast and vital and radiating the particular energy of something that had access to a power source no other pack did. Then the next panel. The dragon caged. The wolf standing apart. The pack continuing, smaller now, the vitality diminished, the image carrying a weight that the carver had clearly felt in their hands while working. Then the final panel. The dragon in stone. Sealed. The wolf turning away. And written in the old symbols at the base of the panel, the same symbols as Senna's book, for words she couldn't read yet. She touched the carving. Her fingers rested on the image of the caged dragon. The wall glowed. Gold, soft and immediate, spreading from her fingertips outward through the carved lines of the image, illuminating the whole panel, the dragon, the wolf, the space between them that was rendered as connection. The space between them glowed brightest. She felt Kale go very still beside her. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the wall. His jaw was set. His expression was doing something complicated and controlled. She looked at his chest. The collar of his heavy shirt had shifted during their walk through the corridors, and at the base of his throat, above the top button, she could see the edge of a scar she hadn't known about. Not a battle scar, those had a different shape, a different story. This one was smooth and deliberate and stretched from his left collarbone and downward. Shaped, and she recognized the shape because she had been studying the carvings for the past 10 minutes, like a wing. She moved before she thought about it. She reached out and touched the scar. He caught her wrist. Not painfully. With the precise minimum of force required to stop her hand, his fingers wrapped around her wrist with the same careful economy he applied to everything. She looked up and found his face 6 inches from hers and something in his pale gray eyes stripped of the tactical and the administrative and the neutral over not neutral. He just looked raw. "Don't," he said. His voice was different. Not the command voice. Something underneath the command voice, older and less rehearsed. "That's not yours to know yet." She held his gaze. She could feel her own heartbeat, and beneath it, distant and vast and warm, the other one. He released her wrist. He stepped back. He adjusted his collar. "We'll finish the tour tomorrow," he said. He walked away down the corridor. His footsteps faded. The gold faded from the wall, not all at once, gradually, like a word someone has said and the air is still holding. She stood alone in the old corridor and looked at the panel. At the dragon sealed in stone. At the wolf turning away. At the 4 words she couldn't yet read carved beneath it. Yet. He had said yet. As if there were a future in which she would know. A future that he could see clearly enough to reference, a future in which she existed and was present and was relevant and had access to information currently being withheld. No one had ever implied that future for her. She pressed her fingertips against the wall again, gently. The gold came back, faint and brief, just long enough to warm her hand. She thought, whatever he knows, whatever is in that scar and those 4 words in Senna's skin page book, it belongs to the same story she walked into in the cave. It was her story as much as anyone's. She was going to learn to read it. Senna's room was in the oldest part of the compound. The walls were ancient dark stone without mortar, the same as the south corridor. The room smelled of dried herbs and old ink and the deep, particular warmth of a place where someone has lived with full attention for a very long time. Every surface was occupied, not cluttered, organized according to a system Lyra could feel but not immediately name, as if the objects were arranged by their relationships to each other rather than by category or size. Lyra sat across from Senna at the small table by the window. Between them was the skin page book, open to the first page. Senna was a precise teacher. She didn't soften the language for the sake of comfort. She didn't offer preamble or hesitation. She began at the beginning and she didn't stop, and if Lyra didn't understand something she wrote it on the slate and Senna answered without impatience. The symbols were not as difficult as Lyra had feared. They were not arbitrary. They had a logic, an old logic, pre-alphabetic, built around images that became abstractions over centuries. Once you understood the foundational images, the rest followed with the internal coherence of something that had been designed to be true rather than merely convenient. She learned the word for dragon first. Then the word for bond. Then the word for choice. Then Senna turned to the chapter that mattered. The first alpha of Kale's bloodline had a name. He was called Marin. He was by all accounts, and the book did not soften this, both extraordinary and catastrophically flawed in the specific way that people are flawed when they have been given tremendous power very young and never required to account for it. Marin had entered the bond with the dragon Vaelith at the age of 19. Not because he was chosen, the book made clear, though he spent the rest of his life claiming he was. Because Vaelith had been young too, young enough to be moved by ambition and strength and the particular magnetism of someone who believes entirely in their own significance. Young enough to make a mistake. They had been bonded for 40 years. Senna read the account of those 40 years in the measured tone of someone reading a record rather than a story. The bond had functioned as bonds were meant to, multiplicative, the dragon's fire and the wolf's instinct amplifying each other in ways that neither could achieve alone. Vaelith's flame gave Marin's pack longevity and resilience. Marin's pack sense gave Vaelith the emotional grounding she needed to be more than a force of nature. To be someone. The pack of Ashenvale during that period was the most powerful in the Northern Territories. Everyone knew why. Everyone was afraid of why. Senna stopped reading. She looked at Lyra across the table with the unhurried directness of someone who has long since made peace with difficult things and no longer feels the need to approach them sideways. This is where it changes, Senna said. This is what the South Corridor carvings don't show because Marin had them stopped before the Mason could finish the sequence. The other packs came to Marin. Not to fight, they were not strong enough to fight him and they knew it. They came to negotiate. They told him that the bond was destabilizing the territorial balance. That packs without dragon bonds could not compete, could not maintain their own populations and territories, and that if the bond continued the Northern Territories would collapse into a single pack dominance that none of them could survive. They told him the bond had to end. Marin had a choice. He could have refused. The territorial arguments were, by the book's own accounting, not incorrect, but they were also not his obligation. The bond was his. Vaelith was his partner. He could have held that. Instead, he made a calculation. The bond had given his pack dominance. The dominance, once established, was structural, it would outlast the bond itself by generations. The debt was paid. He no longer needed the creditor. He waited until Vaelith trusted him completely. He waited until she was asleep, which for a dragon means something closer to what humans call rest, a lightening of the guard, a softening of the awareness. He waited and then he used the bond itself, the sacred pathway that should have connected them, as a conduit for the sealing, an ancient work so forbidden that the book required 3 separate symbol combinations to even describe it. He sealed her in stone using the love she had given him as the lock. He watched them build the cave around her. He watched them lay the egg outside her sealed consciousness like an offering, like an apology, like something he couldn't bring himself to destroy but couldn't keep where he could see it. Then he turned away. And passed the story down through his bloodline as a scar and a silence. The scar on Kale's chest. Present from birth. The shape of a wing. Senna closed the book. Lyra sat very still. Her hands were flat on the table. The scale was warm against her sternum. The heartbeat beneath her heartbeat was steady and vast, and she understood now what was underneath the vastness, what the 3,000 years of stone sleep had contained. Not dormancy. Not the absence of feeling. Grief. Ancient, enormous, patient grief. And underneath the grief, like bedrock under river stone, the question that had sustained consciousness through 3,000 years of sealed darkness. Is there still someone who would do it differently? Senna looked at her. Vaelith didn't choose you because you are powerful, Senna said. You understand that now. Lyra wrote on the slate, She chose me because I know what it is to be imprisoned by someone who was supposed to protect you. Senna nodded once. And because you did not become what they made you. You are still, after everything they have said about what you are, something she can trust. The door to Senna's room opened. Neither of them had heard footsteps. Cale stood in the doorway. He looked at the open book on the table. He looked at Lyra's face. He looked at Senna with an expression that was not anger, exactly, but was the brother of anger, the feeling of being outrun by events you thought you were managing. How long have you known, he asked Senna. About the book? Since before your father was born. Senna folded her hands on the table. About what she is? Since she walked back through the gate yesterday with a scale in her pack that I last saw referenced in this book 300 years ago. Cale looked at Lyra. She picked up the slate. She wrote, "Did you know about Marin?" His jaw moved. Not fully. I knew the scar was a bloodline mark. I thought it was a battle record. A symbol. She wrote, "When did you find out what it actually was?" He held her gaze. 2 nights ago. Senna told me. She looked at the slate. At his answer. She wrote nothing. Then she looked at him. He understood. She saw him understand, saw him trace the exact same path she had traced 2 nights ago. Tonight is the first time he has told her. He opened his mouth. She stood up, placed the chalk on the table, and walked past him out the door. She did not run. Running was for people who were afraid. She was not afraid. She was something colder and more considerate than afraid. She walked to the far end of the east corridor, to the window that looked out onto the ridge, and she stood there with her forehead almost touching the cold glass, and she breathed. The heartbeat was there. The warmth was there. The grief behind the warmth was there, recognized and held, because something 3,000 years old understood exactly what it was to trust the wrong person with the wrong thing and pay the price. She was not Marin's mistake. But she was standing in the compound he built. Surrounded by the legacy of what he had done. And the man carrying his bloodline scar had known the shape of the sin for 2 nights and said nothing. The window glass fogged with her breath. Outside, the ridge was white and silent. Somewhere in the frozen dark, the cave pulsed gold. Somewhere in the frozen dark, something was deciding it had been patient long enough. The sound came at the moment between night and dawn. Not a roar. Not what the old stories described when they imagined how a dragon woke. No fire, no shattering stone, no cataclysmic announcement. Something quieter than that, and therefore more impossible. A sound like the world correcting something it had been saying wrong for 3,000 years. Like reality clearing its throat. Lyra was awake. She had not slept. She felt it before she heard it, the warmth in her chest moving from constant background to active and specific, like a pilot light catching. The heartbeat beneath her heartbeat doubled in speed and then steadied, enormous and deliberate, the pace of something large that does not hurry because it has never needed to. And then, through every wall and floor and the cold stone of the compound's ancient bones, she felt every wolf in Ashenvale go rigid. She was out of her corner and moving before she knew she had decided to move. The courtyard was filling, wolves appearing from dormitory doors and corridor exits, in various states of wakefulness, drawn out by the same involuntary signal that had reached her through the bond. They were looking up. Looking toward the ridge. The cave was glowing. From this distance it was a thread of amber in the dark face of the ridge wall, barely visible, easy to explain away. But no one in the courtyard was trying to explain it away. They were standing in the cold in their sleeping clothes and they were looking at it with the posture of people who had just received a message in a language they hadn't spoken in a long time, from a source they had been told was dead. Cale came out of the main building. He was dressed. He had not slept either. He looked at the ridge. He looked at Lyra. He made the calculation in approximately 3 seconds and then he said to his senior wolves, "Formation. Eastern Gate. Now. Everyone on the perimeter holds position and does not engage. Do you understand? Do not engage." He looked at Lyra. "Come with me." She followed him through the compound to the eastern gate, which opened toward the ridge trail. The senior wolves fell in behind them, then the rest of the available pack, and it was only when she registered the sound of that many wolves moving in coordinated formation that she understood the scale of what was happening. They were escorting her to the cave. As if the whole pack had understood, faster than she had, that what came out of that cave was coming for her specifically. The trail was easy in the dark, wolves had no difficulty with darkness, and they made the outpost in half the usual time, Cale's pace setting the tempo and everyone else matching it. Lyra was breathing hard by the top of the gully. He shortened his stride without looking at her. They stopped at the cave entrance. The warmth from inside was tremendous. Not uncomfortable, it had a quality of welcome, the warmth of a place that has been waiting and is now indicating that the wait is over. The ember light was steady, no longer pulsing with the slow rhythm of dormancy. Constant. Alert. The senior wolves held the formation line without being told. Cale looked at Lyra. "You go first." She went in. The cave was the same and entirely different. The same dimensions, same smooth floor, same chamber at the back. Different in the way a room is different when it is occupied rather than empty, the space organized around a presence rather than an absence. The egg was gone. In its place on the stone shelf, in the amber light, Vaelith raised her head. She was smaller than the stories. Or the stories had been told by people who had never stood 6 feet from a dragon and needed a scale reference to be meaningful. She was large enough that her head alone was the size of a compact pony. Her neck curved in the contained, deliberate way of something that was being careful with its own dimensions in a finite space. Her scales were black at the base and gold at the edge of each one, exactly like the egg had been, and they caught the ambient light and threw it back in patterns that moved like water. She was injured. Not dramatically, no visible wounds, no blood. But the way she held herself, the care in each motion, told the story clearly enough. 3,000 years of stone sleep did not leave a body ready for the world. She was weak in the way that anything is weak that has been unmoved and unexpressed for longer than comprehension. She was looking at Lyra. Her eye was gold. Not reflective gold, generative, as if the gold were a source rather than a surface. The eye was large enough to be considered in its entirety rather than part of something larger, and what it held as it looked at Lyra was not the terrifying blankness of an animal's attention but something that had depth behind it. Recognition. Memory. Something that had been waiting to confirm an answer it had spent 3,000 years already being certain of. Lyra walked forward. She was aware of Cale stopping just inside the cave entrance. She was aware of the senior wolves holding the line outside. She was aware of all of it as information, organized and filed, and she walked forward anyway with the even, unhurried pace of someone going somewhere they have always been going without knowing it. Vaelith lowered her head. She brought it down until it was level with Lyra's face, and she was careful about it, slow and deliberate, the great neck curving, the head settling until one gold eye was 6 inches from Lyra's face and the heat of the dragon's breath moved gently through her hair. Silence. Then, not in sound, not in the air, but directly in the space inside her chest where the warmth lived and the heartbeat matched, a voice. "I have been waiting." Lyra did not speak. She could not speak. But the bond did not require it, the bond had its own pathway, older than words, and she understood this with the wordless certainty of something that had always been true and had only just become available to know. "I know," she said through the bond. "I didn't know I was coming for you. But I think I was always coming for you." The dragon closed and opened the gold eye once. Slowly. Something that was, unmistakably, relief. Behind them, Cale's voice came forward into the cave, low and stripped of strategy. Are you?" Lyra turned. She was different and she knew it. She could feel it in the quality of her own presence, not larger, not louder, but grounded in a new way, as if something that had always been unmoored in her had found a fixed point and anchored. She looked at Cale. She reached into her pocket and held up the scale, which was no longer black and gold but pure gold in the cave's light. He looked at the scale. He looked at her face. He was doing the neutral over not neutral thing, but the over was thinner than she had ever seen it. Then the sound of horses reached them from the direction of the compound, fast horses, more than 3, the pace of official urgency rather than emergency. Through the cave entrance she heard the pack stir, heard Davin's voice saying something sharp and contained. She looked at Cale. He looked at her. "The council," he said. "They must have had monitors closer than the border." He left the cave at a run. She heard him organizing, fast, precise, the language of command that he deployed with the same ease that she deployed invisibility. She heard Davin confirming numbers. She heard Kale say her name, not the mute girl, not the Omega, not the asset. Her name. Her actual name. Telling his wolves to hold the perimeter around the cave regardless of council instruction. Valeth made a sound behind her. Low, not loud, a sound like stone settling, like something that has decided something and is now stating the decision. Through the bond, go. I am stronger with you near the others than I am here alone. Go. Lyra went. She came out of the cave into the gray pre-dawn light and walked to where Kale was standing at the head of his formation, facing the 3 new council wolves who had arrived on horseback and were now dismounting with the efficient urgency of people who had interrupted their own sleep to get here. Aldrich was not with them. These were enforcers. Different categories. The lead enforcer looked at Kale. He looked at Lyra standing next to Kale. He looked back at Kale. Under Territorial Stability Statute 7, the Council orders the immediate retrieval and containment of the Dragon-class entity reported in this territory. Any pack member found to be impeding Council authority in this matter will be subject to. She is not Omega, Kale said. The enforcer stopped. The pack was very still. Lyra looked at the side of Kale's face. His jaw was set. His hands were at his sides. She is bonded, Kale said. He said it the way he said things that were not open to discussion, the flat certainty of someone laying down a fact rather than staking a position. She is bonded, and the entity in that cave is bonded, and council authority does not extend to what is bonded. You know the law as well as I do. The enforcer looked at Lyra. She looked back. He looked back at Kale. This isn't finished, he said. Not even close, Kale agreed. But it is finished for today. They left. The pack waited until the sound of hooves faded. Then they exhaled, collectively, the sound of a held breath finding release. Kale turned to look at Lyra. She was looking at him. She reached for her slate. She wrote 3 words and held it up. Thank you. Yet. He looked at the word she had written. His own word returned to him. Something moved across his face that he did not immediately contain, something open and unguarded that she saw before he could close it. He nodded once. The morning light reached the ridge. In the cave behind them, the gold burned steady and warm. The world had updated one more record. She was not Omega. She was bonded. And the gap between those two things was the entire distance between a closed door and an open sky. She found him that night in the south corridor. He was standing in front of the carved wall. In front of the panel she had illuminated with her touch 3 days ago, the dragon caged, the wolf turning away, the 4 words in old symbols she could now read. She knew what they said. She had read them with Senna that afternoon. He turned away first. Kale stood with his arms at his sides, looking at the carving, and he did not hear her approach because she had spent 3 years learning to move without sound, and those 3 years were good for some things. She stopped 6 feet behind him. She waited. He turned. He had known she was there for at least 10 seconds before he turned. He had simply been finishing a thought. Senna told me you read the full account today, he said. She nodded. He looked at the carving. Back at her. I have been trying to work out how to undo it. She wrote on the slate, you can't undo 3,000 years. No, he said. I mean, the council. The enforcement authority. The statute they're planning to use. He crossed his arms. I have been in contact with 3 allied pack alphas. If we can build a multi-pack coalition that formally contests the stability statute on the grounds that the bonded classification supersedes it, we can tie the council in procedural dispute long enough to. She wrote, when did you contact them? He paused. 2 days ago. She wrote, before or after you decided to assign yourself as my guard. A longer pause. Before. She wrote, and you didn't tell me. He said nothing. Which was itself an answer. She looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote slowly, each word deliberate, I am the one the statute targets. I am the one the council wants. I am the one Valeth bonded to. And you have been building a strategy around my life for 2 days, and I am finding out now because I asked the right question by accident. I was trying to. She held up the slate before he could finish. She had already written the next line. Merrin waited until Vaelith trusted him completely. Then he used the bond she gave him to make decisions about her life. He told himself it was for the good of the pack. The silence that followed was the longest one they had shared in any of their conversations, which had not been long conversations by any measure. Cale looked at the words. He looked at the panel on the wall. He looked at her. And she watched something happen in him that she had not expected to watch, not a defense rising, not the neutral over not neutral. A defense falling. The controlled surface that he wore, the way she wore invisibility, the leadership mask that was so practiced it had become structural, it came down. He looked exhausted. I am not Merrin, he said. His voice was quiet. I know that doesn't mean what I want it to mean yet. She wrote, I know you're not Merrin. She wrote it quickly, then waited to make sure he read it, because she needed that to land before the next part. Then she wrote the next part. But you made a plan about my future and you didn't tell me about it. And the last person who told me I had no voice in my own future stood in the Great Hall and said the pack loses nothing if I don't come back. I can't be asked to trust the difference if the actions look the same from the outside. He read the words. He read them again. He sat down on the floor of the corridor. It was such an unexpected thing, the Alpha of Ashenvale, sitting down on the stone floor of his own compound without ceremony or explanation, as if his legs had made the decision and the rest of him had agreed to follow, that she almost missed what he said next. Tell me what the repair looks like. Write it on the slate. Tell me what earning looks like from where you stand. I'll start there. She stood in the corridor with the slate and the chalk and the warmth in her chest and the vast steady heartbeat beneath her heartbeat, and she looked at him sitting on the floor of the corridor with his bloodline scar and his 3,000 years of inherited sin and his strategic mind that he had been using, however badly, because it was the only tool he knew how to aim at a problem, and she thought about what was true. She wrote slowly. Stop making decisions about my life without me. Even the ones you think are kind. He read it. He nodded. No qualifier. No addendum. Done, he said. She looked at the word. One word. No ceremony. No explanation. Just the flat, certain delivery of someone laying down a fact rather than staking a position. The same voice he used when he said she is not Omega. The same voice he used for things that were not open to discussion. She wrote one more line, that's not forgiveness yet. I know, he said. She wrote, it's a beginning. He looked at those words for a long time. The gold in the carved wall panel was faint, she wasn't touching it, but it was there. Ambient. Background. Present. He stood up. He was 6 inches from her when he was on his feet, closer than usual, and he didn't step back. The coalition meeting is in 3 days, he said. I'd like you to be there. Not observed. Present. Speaking. He paused. Through the slate is speaking. She looked up at him. Something in her chest, in the hollow where the warmth lived, shifted. She nodded. He nodded back. They walked out of the south corridor in the same direction but not quite together, the distance between them smaller than it had been before, the quality of the space different. In the cave on the ridge, Vaelith felt the shift through the bond. She did not say anything. She simply breathed, slow and warm and steady, into the dark. She had been waiting 3,000 years for this bloodline to produce someone who would make the other choice. Patience, it turned out, was not the same as certainty. But sometimes they arrived at the same place. The council's second move arrived on paper. Not in person, that was the tell. Aldrich and the enforcers had come in person because they expected compliance, the natural response of a border pact to the physical presence of council authority. The paper came because they had recalculated. They had decided that compliance was not available through presence and were trying a different kind of force. The document was delivered at the compound gate before dawn on the 4th day by a council courier who handed it to the gate wolf without speaking and was gone before the sun cleared the ridge. Cale read it in the hall with his senior wolves around him. He read it twice. He set it on the table. It's a stability instrument, he said. Old law. Pre-territorial. Davin leaned over the table to read it. His expression changed as he got to the 3rd paragraph. They need a unanimous vote, Davin said. For the instrument to be valid. They got one, Kale said. Yesterday morning. Lyra was not in the hall for this. She was told about it by Senna, who found her in the courtyard and sat down beside her on the stone bench near the water barrel with the directness of someone who has decided that softening information is a form of disrespect. The council has filed a stability instrument against Vaelith, Senna said. Under the oldest pack law, dating before the territorial accords, a creature deemed a threat to collective pack stability can be put down by unanimous council vote. It becomes legally binding within 7 days of filing. Lyra sat with this. Senna said, the instrument is aimed at Vaelith. But a broken bond does not leave the bonded party alive. This is in the old texts. It is not theoretical. Lyra looked at the ridge. The cave was not visible from the courtyard, but she could feel the direction of it the way you feel the location of something you have been paying attention to for a long time. Vaelith came through the bond before she could process what she was feeling. The dragon's presence arrived with the particular quality it had when Vaelith was being precise rather than emotive, organized and specific, the same quality as reading a clear sentence. I know, Vaelith said through the bond. I felt it when the vote was cast. Lyra sent back, are you afraid? A pause. I am angry, Vaelith said. Which is different. Afraid is what you feel when you think you might lose. I have already lost everything worth losing and I am still here. Anger is what you feel when you see the same thing happening again and you have 3,000 years of evidence that it does not have to. Are you strong enough? For what's coming? Another pause. Longer. Not yet, Vaelith said. But I am stronger than yesterday. And you make me stronger than I am alone. That has always been the point of the bond. Lyra sat with that on the stone bench in the cold courtyard until the sun came fully over the ridge and Kale came to find her. He sat down beside her. He had the instrument in his hand. He put it on the bench between them. She looked at it. The official symbol of the council was at the top, a silver ring with a howling wolf enclosed. The text below was dense with legal language. At the bottom, the signatures. 7 of them. Unanimous. She wrote on her slate, what are they afraid of? Power they can't control, Kale said. Which is not new. It's what they've always been afraid of. He looked at the instrument. Specifically, they are afraid of what happens to the territorial hierarchy if one pack has access to a dragon bond. What Ashenvale becomes. What every other pack becomes by comparison. She wrote, the same argument they made to Marin. Yes, he said. And Marin agreed with them. She looked at him. He said, I don't. She wrote, what are you going to do? What I should have done 4 days ago, he said. Include you in the planning. He turned on the bench to face her. The coalition pack alphas are meeting in 2 days. If we can argue that the bonded classification predates the stability statute, that it is not covered by the law the instrument invokes, the instrument can be voided. But the argument has to be made in the old language. The statutory exemption is written in old symbols and council procedure requires it be cited in the original tongue. He paused. Senna says you've been learning to read it. Lyra wrote, I can read it. Speaking is different. I know, he said. They sat with that for a moment. Then he said, Senna also told me something else. Something she found in the book this morning. He looked at the ridge. His voice was careful. The bond is restorative. Slowly. Over time. The old accounts describe bonded pairs who recovered things that had been thought permanent. Injuries. Losses. He did not look at her. He was giving her the space to receive the sentence without an audience. She was very still. The warmth in her chest moved. She wrote, how much time? It's not an exact account, he said. It depends on the bond. On both parties. On how much they allow the bond to work rather than containing it. He glanced at her then. On whether they stop being afraid to let something in. She looked at what she'd written. She looked at his face. She wrote, I have been afraid of the bond. I know, he said. I've been watching you manage it instead of live in it. He paused. For what it's worth, I have been afraid of you since the first morning I looked at that scale and it responded and I understood that the thing I was least prepared for had arrived. She wrote, "What thing?" He was quiet for a moment. "Something I couldn't put in a ledger." She looked at the words. Something she was not practiced at, not trained for, was gathering in her chest alongside the warmth and the ancient heartbeat. Something small and new and not yet named. She wrote, "Show me the full coalition plan." Before the meeting. "All of it." "All of it," he confirmed. She wrote, "And don't call me the asset again." His jaw moved. Something happened in his face that she understood, after a moment, was the cousin of a smile in a person who had stopped practicing them. "Done," he said. The coalition meeting was held in the Ashenvale Hall. 3 allied pack alphas arrived over the course of the morning: Sona of the Greenvale Pack, Heir of the Iron Pass, and the oldest, Beld of the Deepfen, who had been alpha for 40 years and carried it the way old mountains carry their height, as something that simply was, without effort or announcement. Lyra was at the table. Not at the edge of the room. Not near the door, positioned for a quick exit. At the table, with the slate and chalk in front of her and Senna on her left and Kale directly across. She had been introduced by name. Her actual name. By Kale, who had said it without qualifier or explanation, the way you say the name of someone who requires no introduction because their presence is the introduction. The 3 alphas had looked at her with 3 different varieties of the same expression, the recalibrating, recalculating look she was becoming familiar with. Then they had looked at Vaelith, visible through the hall's high east window in the courtyard outside, and the recalibrating had accelerated. Vaelith had grown visibly over the past 4 days. Not dramatically, not the thunderous expansion of the old stories. Quietly. Steadily. The way anything grows that is finally being given what it needs. Her scales caught the morning light and threw it across the courtyard stones in shifting gold patterns. She held herself with less careful economy than she had in the cave, more of her presence allowed into the space. The council instrument sat at the center of the table. Kale opened the meeting. He laid out the coalition argument with the clean, stripped efficiency she had come to understand was not coldness but precision, the voice of someone who respected the people he was speaking to enough not to waste their time. The bonded classification. The old law. The statutory exemption that predated the Stability Act by 400 years. The fact that the council had invoked a law that was, by its own foundational text, inapplicable to bonded pairs. The argument was sound. She had read every document he'd shown her. It was sound. But Heir of Iron Pass leaned forward when Kale finished and said the thing they all knew he would say. The statutory exemption must be cited in the original language. Council procedure. Without an original language citation from someone with legal standing in this room, the argument cannot be formally entered. He looked at Kale. "Do you read the old symbols?" "No," Kale said. Heir looked at Senna. "The elder?" "I read them," Senna said. "But I am not pack-ranked. I don't have legal standing in a coalition proceeding." The room was quiet. Lyra looked at the instrument in the center of the table. She looked at the 7 signatures. She looked at the council symbol at the top, the silver ring and the wolf. She thought about Vaelith sealed in stone. She thought about Marin turning away. She thought about the 4 words carved in the corridor, "He turned away first." She thought about Kale sitting on the floor of the corridor and asking her what repair looks like. She thought about the warmth in her chest, which had been building for 9 days, not slowly anymore, steadily, a fire that had found its fuel and was reaching the temperature it had always been capable of. The bond was restorative, Senna's book said. Over time. If you stopped being afraid to let it in. She put the chalk down. She opened her mouth. She had not opened her mouth with intent in 3 years. The mechanisms of it were unfamiliar and the fear of what would or would not come out was a physical thing, a cold hand on her chest. The 3 alphas were watching. Kale was watching, and his face had gone entirely still. Senna's hands were flat on the table. No one was breathing. She thought of Vaelith's voice in the bond, direct and old and without apology, "I have been waiting." She thought of her own answer, "I think I was always coming for you." She opened her mouth. And she said Vaelith's name. In the old language. The true name, not the common name that the pack stories had preserved but the actual name, the one in the skin page book that Senna had taught her 4 days ago and that she had been holding like a thing too valuable to spend. The name in the old language had 7 syllables and each one had weight and the room held them. And the instrument on the table caught fire. Not violently. Gold, from the edges inward, the same gold as the cave walls, as the egg's veins, as Vailith's eye. The 7 signatures burned first. Then the council symbol. Then the text. Not leaving ash, leaving nothing. Dissolving, as if the paper understood that it had never had the legal authority it had been asked to carry and was relieved to be released from the pretense. In the courtyard, Vailith lifted her head. The 3 alphas were on their feet. Lyra's voice had not stopped. She said the statutory exemption in the old language. She had memorized it that morning, sitting with Senna and the book in the grey pre-dawn, the symbols becoming sounds, becoming sentences that had been waiting 400 years to be spoken by someone with legal standing and the bond that made them applicable. When she stopped, the room was very quiet. Her voice was rough from years of disuse. It was not a beautiful speaking voice by any conventional assessment. It was unsteady at the edges and too low in the middle, and it broke once in the 5th syllable of the exemption citation and held on through the break. It was the most extraordinary thing any of them had ever heard. Because they knew what it cost. The belt of Deepfin sat back down. He looked at the space where the instrument had been. He looked at Lyra. He said, in the measured voice of 40 years of alpha authority, that is a valid citation. Spoken by a bonded party. In the original language. The council's instrument is void. Their vote is void. Any subsequent instrument on the same grounds is void by statutory exemption. He looked at Kale. Your coalition is sustained. She is standing. Kale looked at her. She looked back. He did not say anything. She did not write anything. The distance between them had been changing for 9 days, and it had changed again, and neither of them felt the need to annotate it. She looked at the alphas. She looked at Senna. She reached for the slate, habit, the comfort of the old tool, and then she set it back down and she spoke. Her voice came out steadier this time. Tell them what you saw, she said. The words were simple and she chose them carefully, the way you choose the first words of something. Tell the council what happened here. Tell them the bond is real. Tell them the old laws are awake. She paused. Tell them the next time they want to send an instrument instead of having a conversation, I will answer in the old language. And I know more of it now than I did this morning. The coalition adjourned. The pack of Ashenvale told the story for generations. The details changed with the telling, the way details always do when a story matters enough to survive its tellers. In some versions she had been mute from birth. In others it was something done to her. In all of them, she touched the egg and the egg responded and the world did not recover from it. In all of them, the voice arrived at the exact moment it was needed and not one day before. As if it had always known what it was for and had simply been waiting for the question worthy of it. The council sent letters after the coalition meeting. 3 of them over the following 6 months, each one addressed more carefully than the last. They were addressed by name. Her actual name. They did not send instruments again. Vailith grew. Slowly, steadily, the way anything grows that has waited long enough. By the following winter she could be seen on the high peaks at dusk, her black and gold scales catching the last light, moving with the ease of something that has finally remembered what it was built for. The wolves who saw her did not file threat assessments. They watched. The pack that had believed itself diminished by comparison to packs with resources and history and established power discovered, in the years that followed, that it was not diminished at all. It had simply been waiting for the right thing to happen in its territory. And in the cave, empty now, the smooth stone floor warm even in deepest winter, the amber light ambient and gentle, the 4 carved words that Marin had tried to stop his mason from finishing were still there. He turned away first. Beneath them, someone had added 4 more. The chisel marks were new. She did not. Lyra did not find her voice because someone gave it back to her. She found it because she stopped waiting for permission to use it. That is the thing about people who are told they have nothing to offer, who are told they are a loss the room sustains without feeling. They are not nothing. They are almost always exactly what the oldest, most important thing in the world has been waiting for. They are the people who don't turn away. If this story reached something in you tonight, if any part of Lyra's journey felt like yours, please hit that like button right now. It is the single most powerful way to tell the algorithm that this story deserves to be found by the next person who needs it. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. New stories every week, every one of them built for the people who are told the room loses nothing without them. Leave a comment. Tell me who you came here for. Tell me if you found your voice tonight or if you're still looking for it. I read every one. And every one matters. See you in the next story.